Hey there, everyone. Hey there, listeners. Kath Langman here, back with another episode of the Scale My Shopify Store podcast. My goodness, we are so close to the end of the year now. And as we make our way to the very end of 2023, I don't know about you, but I'm finding myself kind of running around like a chook with its head cut off, trying to juggle all the things, all the end of school year and sporting events with my kids and trying to get some Christmas gift buying underway and baking some Christmas cakes and organizing family and friend get-togethers and more food, along with, of course, frantically working through my work to-do list that needs to be completed before I take any time off, as well as trying to think and plan ahead for 2024. My gosh, just even saying all of that is kind of making me feel a little bit weary. But it's always a little bit like this in e-commerce at this time of the year, given we are coming into the very end of the busiest quarter of the year, September, well, busiest 4 months really, but yeah, October to December. Anywho, I don't know about you, but for years I was operating in a way where I would seriously, by this point in the year, I'd be feeling stressed to the eyeballs with this kind of frenetic, chaotic pace, and I was always kind of trying to be a brick wall in the face of a tornado, and when probably I should have been a little bit more like a blade of grass, just going with the flow. I would feel like I had to tick off absolutely every single project or idea that I'd had all year. And if I didn't, then I couldn't possibly, allow myself to relax and enjoy some time off over Christmas. And then come Christmas Day, I would pretty much promptly fall in an exhausted heap before the pudding was served. And I would remain exhausted and burnt out until it was time to wind back up into gear for work again. I'm sure all of you type A perfectionist types can identify. I always put my hand up and say I'm a recovering type A. And over the years, my hubby and my sister would always say to me I needed to relax and work less, because they could see myself, I was driving myself crazy with all of these expectations and pressures that I seemingly put on myself. And that was kind of true, and they were kind of right. Now, I reckon, regardless of whether you celebrate Christmas like my family does or not, if you run an e-commerce business, I feel pretty confident that this year has required a fair amount of energy and creativity and dedication to get you through. Or as Alex the Lion in Madagascar 2 says, it's taken grit, spit, and a whole lot of duct tape to hold it all together. Now, if that's not you and you feel happy and full of energy right now, then I am absolutely thrilled for you. Whatever you do, can you please bottle it and sell it to the rest of us and keep doing whatever it is that you're doing? But if you're like so many business owners that I have observed in recent times, I really want to share just a little bit of knowledge and a couple of secrets, a couple of little hacks of mine that have really helped me to get past that state and that way of being. Now, this is not going to be a long episode today. We are so close to the end of the year. You guys are all busy, and probably not just with work stuff, but this is such a hugely important topic to discuss. And I really wanted to share this stuff with you today when it's not really business strategy related. This is the kind of stuff, this is just going to be a few ideas that you can take with you without needing to feel like you have to jump into work and give it a go. So ultimately, my aim today is to prove to you that it's actually more productive to take some time off, to psychologically detach from work. So I'm going to be putting a strong argument today that it is time for you to down tools and forget about work for a little bit. Even just for a couple of days, if that's all the time that you can manage right now. For those of you who are gearing up for your biggest Boxing Day, biggest sale of the year with Boxing Day, you can, reserve this for when that concludes. But the idea is to fully allow your brain and your mind to relax and enjoy other parts of your life. Now, most of you probably know by now that my first business was a modern cloth nappy brand, which I started back in 2007 when I was on maternity leave. And it was a fairly fast and furious growth journey over 7 years. And at that point, I was just utterly exhausted and burnt out. Now, this, that wasn't the only reason that I decided to sell my business, but it was definitely a contributing factor for me, kind of falling out of love with that business a little bit and ultimately deciding to sell it. And about a year after that, I started my current business and I was full of energy and passion and motivation again for my work. And until a couple of years after that, when the same feelings of exhaustion and burnout started to trigger again. And at that point, I realized that, the business wasn't the problem, the work wasn't the problem. I was, my way of working and dealing with stress was letting me down. And, I was just working all the time, even if I wasn't actually at my desk, I was working on my phone or I was thinking about work, or I might be answering social media queries from the side of the pool when my kids were in their swimming lessons, or I'd be jumping on the computer in the evening to finish whatever I hadn't completed from the day, or to just quickly respond to that customer or write that email or whatever the case may be. And I know a lot of you can relate because I see many of you doing the same things as well. And it's completely understandable why we do this. We start our businesses, when we start our businesses, they are a little bit like our babies. We want to do everything that we can to nurture them and bring them to life and help them to grow and thrive. And to a certain extent, I do feel like that sort of all-in hustle mentality is needed in the early stages just to really get it off the ground. But we can't maintain that way of working and that level of intensity ongoing. It's not something that, we've got to remember that business is a marathon, not a sprint, and we can't maintain that way of working in a marathon. But aside from that, we also have it goes without saying, I think, but we have a lot of ego tied up in our business. It's basically it becomes part of our identity, I think, and we can't abide by the idea that any customer or subscriber or follower or supplier or team member might think that we've produced something of poor quality or provided poor customer service, even though inevitably we don't control all elements of what we do. There are external factors at play that come into things, right? And so we end up always reacting to everything to make sure everyone is happy, and we internalize the notion that we don't, if we don't do things properly, which for many women often means doing everything ourselves, then it'll all fall over. And that fear of failure, if we don't do this one thing right now, it's a real thing, right? Yet when I looked around, so this is, a couple of years after I started this business, when I looked around, I could see so many other business owners managing to grow their business without struggling with stress or burnout in the same fashion. Yes, they were just as ambitious and they were, working towards big goals like I was, but they weren't suffering in the same way that I felt that I was at that time. And so in my usual habitual way, I decided it must be possible to achieve this, right? And to achieve success and have quality of life. And so achieving that kind of balance became my new mission, one of my new missions. And initially I started small, so just giving myself firmer boundaries with work. I think a lot of you who are working from home could do with this. So for me, I have worked from home all the time, and work always seemed to bleed into family life. I'd always, I guess over the years, I just found it really hard to switch off, and I would often just quickly pop into my office to do something when I thought about it, particularly in the evenings after the kids were in bed, or maybe on the weekends when I didn't, feel like I had anything else on, or clearly I'd been too busy to organize to have something, who knows. Anyway, so that, first boundary really became sticking to set work days and hours of the day and shutting the door to my office outside of those office hours. It also, kind of alongside that, it had to be rules for use of the mobile phone, and jumping online that way. But, just not doing that on its own, just that particular work boundary was pretty transformational, to be honest. It was fairly apparent that I'd been a little bit addicted to work and had become a little bit one-dimensional, I think, in terms of my life. So, I guess I just realized hadn't been spending as much time with friends or pursuing hobbies, or just, I guess, spending time in other aspects of my personality, which just kind of meant that in hindsight, I realize it meant that my sense of happiness about myself was so intrinsically tied to how I felt about my business, which I don't think is a particularly healthy way to live, and it certainly doesn't help with the stress levels. So I reckon it was a couple of years after that, though, that two things happened that were real triggers for change, bigger change. Firstly, that was when my sons really ramped up their swimming training sessions to mornings before school and afternoons after school. And this was before either of them had their driving license. So all of a sudden, I was spending about 2 hours driving them every day. And it meant that my work days were even shorter still. And it also meant I was getting a lot less sleep and I was a lot more tired. As an aside, I think it's pretty amazing how productive we can be when we don't have a lot of time available. There is zero time for going down the TikTok rabbit hole or any other means of procrastination. The second thing that happened that year, though, was that I got the full-on flu. Now, this was well before COVID, so it was definitely just the flu, but I was absolutely flattened for about a month and it was pretty nasty. But during that time, one of the things I could do was to read. And during that time, I first read Arianna Huffington's book, Thrive. And Arianna is, of course, the founder of Huffington Post media site. She is a hugely successful entrepreneur. But in that book, I mean, it's a great book. If you've never read it, you definitely should read it. It's amazing. But in that book, she describes her experience of being so sleep deprived and exhausted one day at work that she actually fell over and hit her head on her desk, knocking herself unconscious and ended up in hospital. And, you know, this idea that we can keep pushing ourselves day in and day out and still be productive and useful and add value to anything or anyone, I think is, you know, it's basically how I would define hustle culture. And, you know, it's highly praised. You know, let's face it, it's a highly praised way of being, but it's false. You know, it can never last. And that comes down to, you know, some biological reasons that I'm going to touch on in a minute. But one quote in that book that Arianna shared, which I think was originally a Maya Angelou quote, was something like, "Be present wherever you are." And so I decided to really try that. And, you know, for me, it meant like when I was parenting, I was just going to be fully engrossed in that. If I was doing chores, I was just going to fully, you know, focus on that. And if I was at work, I was just going to fully focus on that. And it meant, you know, I wasn't trying to parent at the same time. It's really hard for working mums to be like this, I think. And so for me, a few things that a few changes that transpired with this change of how I would operate was, you know, things like stopping work before dinner and not going back online at all in the evenings or on the weekends. It meant things like no phones at the dinner table, no digital devices in bed in the evening, not even a TV. It meant reading non-business related physical books like the old paper variety in bed at night instead, and really working hard to establishing a quality sleep routine. It meant building some regular exercise in my life and having proper healthy lunches literally away from my desk, you know, so going to a different room and sitting at a table and eating lunch that way. And I literally had to schedule my lunch break in my calendar to make sure, you know, initially to make sure that that was non-negotiable and that I wasn't going to schedule meetings during lunch breaks. It also meant, you know, starting some new habits like daily meditation and journaling and things like that. But outside of that, it also meant rediscovering some other hobbies, spending more regular time with friends and getting involved in a local not-for-profit organization. And, you know, so I guess a few daily habits as well as, you know, weekly or less frequent activities and methods that I started to practice consistently to really bring some calm into my life and, you know, I guess give me some very simple practical tools that I could turn to at a second's notice if I really needed to de-stress. Now, of course, actually taking a vacation is also a tremendous thing that you can do for your health and well-being. And I did start to take some of those as well, which at first was a little bit of a novelty. Of course, the last 2 years, my holidays seem to be chaperoning my sons at interstate swimming competitions, but never mind. that's all still good. It's a bit of a break from the usual. One year, I think we went away to a beach holiday in the winter. I love doing that, but swimmers can't swim in the sea when it's freezing cold down in the south in the middle of winter. But I made the whole family join me in doing an entire week's holiday without phones. So you can imagine how well that went down with the teenagers. I can't remember now if they stuck it the whole way through, but I got through lots of novels that particular week. Anyhow, after practicing these habits fairly consistently most days for several years now, I can tell you that even though this year, or the last few years, if we're honest, that have been pretty stressful, I mean, that's putting it mildly, isn't it? I still feel mostly pretty content and quite energized, and like I can bring my best creative self to work. And that's because I have been psychologically detaching from work on a very regular basis. I think for entrepreneurs and people who need to employ creative thinking, creative innovations, problem solving on a constant basis, we really need to allow our brains to be able to perform at their best. And that's why this is so important. But I don't just want you to take my word for this. I really want to share some of the science and what that says about the importance of psychologically detaching from work. So, the thing is that a healthy detachment creates space in your mind for a sense of objectivity about your work, and that makes you more productive. So this is what I've been reading up about to, really understand why what I've been doing has been so transformative. Psychological detachment from work doesn't mean not caring. If we can't finish a job this afternoon that we thought we would, it doesn't mean that we don't care about it, but it's also the antidote to caring too much, which is when we really run into trouble. If we care too much, even slight negatives can cause really strong emotional responses, whether it's feeling angry or hurt or embarrassed or whatever the case may be, or less than, yet when we're in those really heightened negative emotional states, our problem-solving skills take a total nosedive. So we tend to make really poor decisions and plans when we are in those situations. When we psychologically detach from work on a regular basis, this increases our level of ability to cope with the demanding workloads that we have in this kind of a role without feeling so stressed. On the opposite side, though, if we do not psychologically detach ourselves from work, we feel emotionally exhausted, physically burnt out, and struggle more often with anxiety and insomnia. Now, I just want to say that again: emotionally exhausted, physically burnt out, and struggle more often with anxiety and insomnia. I don't think I've met an entrepreneur, not recently anyway, who hasn't struggled with those things for some time, okay? I hope that's not you, but if it is, that's what this episode is for. In my own experience, psychologically detaching from work was a bit of a learned skill. For me, it was a case of fake it till you make it, and I made myself adopt the daily and weekly habits that I spoke about earlier. And with time, I realized that I was much more able to withstand, the stresses and, that roller coaster that being an entrepreneur can be and can feel like. I was really able to withstand it a lot more. I became more resilient, I guess. And I guess I just was able to, and in life as well, it's not just in business. And I felt I was able to cope with it all without falling in a heap or ending the day feeling like I desperately needed some chocolate or a glass of wine to reward myself for getting through another day. I think one of the hardest parts, though, is kind of letting go of some of the ego. I don't think anyone wants to fail. We're biologically programmed to avoid failure at all costs. But without risking some things not working, business will fail. We will never learn or progress, let alone succeed, without trying some things, knowing that it won't all work out perfectly. So I found that, in that regard, that focusing more on the overarching objectives, vision, and goals that I'm aiming towards versus the bumpy road in the moment that's going to get me there. So just focusing on what's ahead is a lot more helpful. I've also very much found that having the right people around me to bounce ideas off and to have the discussions about, the good, the bad, the ugly, the ideas, the brainstorming, all of that kind of stuff I've personally found super helpful as well. But I think with time and practice, a lot less of your sense of happiness or success is tied up in your business and how you feel your business is going, because you end up practicing more aspects of your personality, for want of a better way of putting it. And because you feel happier and more rested, you end up having more and better creative ideas that you can bring to your business that help grow it. And when you are at work, and you have more energy to actually do the work in your business, and you also become a lot more productive. So, here's to having a Christmas or, other type of holiday. Any kind of a holiday will do, whatever it is for you. You have my permission and if you need it, and my very strong recommendation to take some time out of your business and to just not think about work for a few days, or even longer if you can manage it. Try, laugh, have some fun, get lots of sleep if you can, and just enjoy other aspects of your life for a little while, and so that you can come back to your business feeling a lot more fresh and creative and motivated and energized and ready to go. I was going to say, to finish it off, I'll see you in the new year, but I actually do have one last episode coming for 2023, my annual book review episode that I has become my habit to release in the last episode of the year, about the most inspiring and helpful books that I've read this year. So that's going to come next week. It'll be, I think, a good episode to listen to in that kind of Christmas to New Year break without feeling like you actually have to implement anything from that as well. So look forward to that. But I hope you found this one interesting anyway. Hopefully it gives you a few ideas for how you might be able to feel a little bit more rested and rejuvenated in your work a little bit more often. That's it from me today, though. Bye for now.